Hi there, I'm going to take a quick look at a demo which I've just written for Sound Dust Volumes 1 and 2, with specifically looking at the way that I've used compression, EQ primarily, but also, you know, kind of delays and stuff like that, to give stuff kind of vibe, not necessarily to fix anything, but just to kind of add kind of character and atmosphere. I'm going to play the whole track through at the end, but just to dive into the middle so you can hear kind of roughly what's going on, and then we'll start looking at individual tracks. I'm going to pop my headphones on so I can rabbit over this without using the speakers and crashing the voiceover. Right, so you get the idea. Gone for quite a heavily compressed kind of sound, and trying to get everything kind of nice and swimmy and really crisp and beautiful. So let's have a look and see what we've got going on. So the first thing up is I've got the dulcitone, and I've got a couple of different things on here. So let me just turn these off quickly, and also the reverb. So what it sounds like in its kind of raw form, which is absolutely lovely. So what I wanted to do is initially I wanted to get a kind of compressed sound, just to try and rein it in. I really like this sound when you really hammer it, but the problem with that is that it leaps forward out of the track. So what I'm trying to get is a kind of level sound, but I can still get the intensity into the odd chord without overpowering everything else that's going on. So the Fairchild is a great tool for this. So you can see what's happening here. You can see the gain reduction. I'm not kind of trying to pull all of the dynamic out of the sound, but I'm just trying to tame the very, very loud stuff at the end. I've also put a channel EQ in to take a little bit of the low end out and to just boost the kind of 2K-ish to get some of the, if you have a listen to it with and without. So you can see it's not drastic, but it's just shaping the sound a little bit and leaving me a little bit more room in the bottom end. Just taking a little bit of that bottom end out in order to make a bit of space in the mix for other stuff. Now the final thing, and I had all of this going before I actually started performing it, so that I've got the sound so it's kind of giving me a good feeling before I start playing stuff in. The final thing is to put a bit of reverb on. Now it actually says TC Hall, but I changed my mind halfway through. So I'll show you what the reverb that I'm actually using is. The Black Hole. Surprise, surprise. Controversially, I've got this set not 100% mix, but you'll get what I'm trying to get at. It's just really about finding the balance. And yes, I could easily set it to 100% and then go back, but I just whacked it up quickly, found a quick balance that I liked, and I've used it on a couple of other things as well, so I've just left it set like that. So what I'm going for here is you can get that kind of beautiful ghostly sound even when you're playing softly, but when you really hammer it, something interesting happens. It really kind of triggers some of the more interesting stuff in, and it's possibly just a difference in level. It's possibly just that you're really hearing tons more stuff coming back from the Black Hole. But I love the fact that I've got it set so it's providing a general wash all of the time. But then when you really whack it, it kind of gives you that long-lasting kind of thing that just carries on into the track beyond. So let's have a look at the next sound up, which is Flutter Dust. So I'll play you what this sounds like in the track first, and then we'll deconstruct it. Okay, so what's going on here? Let's turn everything off. And the sound itself is fairly straightforward. I'll just pop the contact instrument up so you can see it. I found a nice point in the wavetable where I'm getting that kind of something that sounds like a little string line off an old record that's been messed up. And then I'm basically trying to treat it, really dirty it up and make it sound like I've nicked a little sample off a record and I'm popped it in my track to give it some vibe. So the first thing that I'm putting up is the clean guitar sound. I'm actually just using a preset here. It's a Pensado preset from the Waves guitar amp. Super simple, so that sounds like this. So this is a sound that I love. I've been using it for years and years and years. It's a kind of modulation plugin. It's quite an interesting one because it's got all kinds of stuff: feedback loops, LFOs, variable, varying the LFO as you go, and a kind of bit of reverb, all kinds of mad stuff. But you can get some really great sounds out of it. And I'm not doing anything too drastic with it. It sounds like this. But it is giving me a nice bit of extra character and just movement within the sound. I'm using the tremolo to move the sound physically around. And finally, I'm using a bit of the black hole just to give it a huge space to live in. So let's move on to our next sound. This is super simple. I'm just using a snare sound from Autoharp. Absolutely plain vanilla. Sounds like this. Now next up is a kind of, for want of a better word, I'll call it a shaker. But this is what it sounds like raw. Now, how am I using this? I'm using it with some distortion, and the distortion that I'm using is the basic Logic distortion. Sounds like this. And I'm also got a bit of H delay on it. So I'm using this 100% wet because as I was messing around with it, I discovered that the place that I put it in, it actually sounded better, just what was coming back rhythmically from the delay itself. So just in context, I'll just unsolo that for a second so you can hear what's going on. So it's a snare sound, but I'm using it like a kind of a little extra shaker beat, or maybe even a ghost snare or something like that. However you kind of want to think about it. When I started putting this sound in, I was thinking about a little occasional 16th pattern, which is why it's called 16, and I ended up using that sound. Let's have a look at the next one up, hi-hat. Again, let's turn these off. I've got the black hole on that as well, but let's have a quick look. So I'm using sound. Just a very crisp hi-hat. And then I've got a couple of things going on here. I've got the Echo Boy. Now, a couple of things worth noting here. I'm using a fairly straightforward ping pong with 16th on one side and 8th on the other, which is fairly standard. I have got quite high feedback, but I'm also using a tiny bit of the feel control, which is just, I've just got it kind of being a little bit lazy. So it just falls behind the beat a tiny bit. I really love that sound. And then on my EQ, I'm using a massive amount of high cut. So I'm pretty much cutting everything from 2K upwards. And that changes the sound like this. So I'm just taking all of that top end out because I want the stuff that I really want to be crisp. to occupy the top end and to really cut through. And the more stuff you've got going on in the top end, the less effect the stuff that you really want to have shining through has. Let's look at my bass drum sound. So what am I using on here? Right, we've got first up, well, let me play you what I'm using. No surprise there, it's the Autoharp again. Now I've got first up my UAD LA3A. Now I'll play the sound and then I'll switch this in. So using this for a bassy sound, which is really kind of shines on, I've got it set so that it's kind of reining in the sound after the attack. And this is pulling up some of the bass frequencies and really giving me a kind of nice rounded sound, a nice kind of boomy open sound. So just compare those again. And off. It really does. It pulls forward the kind of boom of the sound. So that's a good start. Let's look at what is up next. So I've got quite a extreme EQ curve here. So just have a listen to what happens when I switch this in and out. And you'll notice that I've put this after the compressor. I wanted to get the shape of the sound with the compressor first. Then I wanted to EQ that sound. So what I've done is I've pulled up 100 hertz here to really push the boom, the punchy element of the boom forward. I've got another boost here, 700 hertz. So that's taking the boxy part of the sound and really pushing that. And then I've got my cut here, just shelving upwards to take some of the top end off. Again, it's just stuff that I don't need. And it's taking away from what I'm actually aiming at, which is the boom at the bottom there. So I'll play it first and then I'll switch that in. So you can hear that we've cut the top end, we've got the boom and the boxy element of the sound really pushed forward. And I really love the way that sits in context with everything else. So next up is the Autoharp, Grand Thrift Autoharp, and that is really great sound on its own. I'll just play you. Almost like a kind of Koto-esque sound on this particular preset, although obviously it has presets that kind of ring out, as you'd imagine as well. So I've got a couple of things on here. I've got the Echo Boy. So super simple. There's a very, very tiny difference between the two echoes that I'm using, Echo 1 and Echo 2, but essentially it's just a 300 millisecond delay. And then I'm using the Random Hall. And if I pop that on as well, and I've got that after the Echo Boy so that I'm getting the Random Hall reverb across the whole thing. And I've got it set quite high on the mix as well. I'm also using a notch setting, which is just basically a 2K, just under 2K cut to take some of that element out of the sound as well. And that in context sounds like this. So you can hear where the delays are coming in. They're coming in on the 16ths, and but it's a tiny, tiny bit out. So it's giving me an interesting little kind of cross rhythm. Next up is the Ship's Piano. I've just got Echo Boy on that. So again, this is just a kind of an extra harmonic part. Sounds like this. And I wanted to give that lots and lots of echo. So we've got this going on here. Now this is quite an interesting preset. Comes up super, super, super long. I mean, it's already quite long here. But what I've actually done is I've really tamed it down, pulled it down from about 11 seconds to about 4 seconds. But it sounds like this. So you can hear it's going on and on and on. And I'm using this for some nice little color. So you can hear, it's providing those flourishes and things that carry over the bars and things like that. It's quite a nice effect. Next up, Infundibulum. Right, so this is a kind of like a gate sequencer. So let me turn the effects off. Echo Boy and Channel EQ, and it sounds like this. So you can hear that there are three components to the sound. My Rhodes in the middle, I've got my woody sound, which is an octave down, and then my windy sound, which is an octave up. I've programmed in a kind of nice pattern that I like, which sort of varies to give you a little bit of a bubbly kind of thing. And in the context of the track, I'm using it, it comes in and out, but it's kind of giving some extra movement to the chords. So have a listen. So you see what I'm doing. Now, if we go back to the mix page, what have we got going on here? So we've got a very, very simple Echo Boy tape 8s, and I've tweaked it a tiny bit, but not very much. And that has this effect. So straightforward, just straight down the middle. Again, contrast. I've got my things that bounce from left to right, and then you know, I'm occupying a different space. I'm putting those straight down the middle so that I'm not kind of doing everything with everything. I'm trying to make these sounds distinct so that when they occur in the track, they kind of catch your ear and hopefully make it sound a little bit more interesting. I've got a channel EQ on here, and it's you know, cutting a lot of the bottom end and boosting some top end. Now that's to help this sound cut through in the mix. So let me turn it off and I'll show you how it changes the sound. So you can hear I'm taking some of the woolliness out of the sound and then just brightening it and giving it that air, that sheen at the top end. It's not making the sound more cutting, it's just making it more kind of present in the top end. So if I was to boost in the 2K area, maybe, you know, 1.5 to 2K, then it would really start to pierce through. And I don't really want that because I've got sounds that are doing that. So this is really just to give it a little bit of air. So last but not least, we have the Pendulonium. This is these baritone guitars, and there's also a little bit of kind of interesting effect. There's quite a lot of stuff on here. So let me just turn it all off, and you can hear, and the black hole, you can hear what it sounds like just on its own. So low note there, and then also we've got some higher stuff. So it's an interesting sound, but there's a lot that I want to do with it to make it really characterful. So the first thing, and I'll just play these on the keyboard as I switch them on. First thing up is the Echo Boy. So what I'm doing here is I'm just accenting the element of slappiness that's in the original sound, really giving it a very audible extra slap, and that's 80 milliseconds roughly. Next up, I'm carving the sound quite significantly, so check this out. So what have we got going on here? Right, we've taken a lot of the low end out. We've got a little bit of a boost in the kind of low mid to give it some extra punch. We've taken out some of the boxiness between 500 and 1K just to make a bit of space in the mix for everything else. And then we've really hard boosted 2K and then a little bit of a kind of shelf at 6K. So the shelf is just to continue the EQ going up, so that I'm bringing up the air of the sound. But the 2K is to give it that pokey thing. I really do want this to poke. This is one of the sounds that I want to, when it comes through the track, it's tuned into that. I don't know, it's the frequency of a baby's cry or something like that. It's round about there. It's that sound that really your ears are very, very sensitive to. So that's the one that I want it to cut through at. We've got tremolo. Again, this is where I'm moving the sound around. So that's, you know, really want to have that sound. And we've got random hall. Now I've used a trick that I've talked about on one of my other vlogs, but basically I'm putting in a nice long pre-delay. It's a little bit over an exact beat, but it just kind of felt good. So it's giving me that kind of ricochet before the reverb really cuts in. So that's something that I love. And then finally, black hole, just to really spread the sound out and make it last throughout the track very, very audibly. So let's turn all of that stuff off again, just compare. So, all good. Now, what am I doing over at the end here? Well, I've got an I/O. So, I've used some 2-bus stuff on here. And I'm going to grab my phone out so I can show you what I've got that set to. So I'm using two things. I'm using my API EQ. And if we go in a little bit closer, you can see that I've got a 2 dB boost on the low end at 100K and a 4 dB boost on the high end at 12.5K, same left and right. And then I'm using the SSL compressor. That's set to my usual 1 millisecond attack and 100 millisecond release. Ratio again is the 4 sort of common mix bus, and then my makeup gain to take it back up. You know, one thing which I would always suggest, it's much harder to put your 2-bus compression and EQ on after you finish the track. Sometimes it works really well, but a lot of the time you find that all of your internal balances change and you have to go all the way back to the beginning. And it's very hard when you're building a track, you're kind of doing this kind of mix as you go, kind of trying to be creative, get some vibe into it as you're actually working. It's much easier to get a feel for where the balances should be, where the volume should be, how much EQ you should use and reverb as you're building up your track. And inevitably you'll go back and tweak something. But to put something on that just drastically changes everything at the end can cast you a bit adrift. So what I do is I work through it. It doesn't really add any noticeable delay to what you're playing because it's analog outboard, so you don't have to worry about that. You might have that problem if you were trying to work through Ozone. You might find it a little bit laggy, or any of those very, very heavy plugins that have got all of this kind of stuff in plugin form. So it's a bit easier with analog outboard, but I still go with the fact that the advantage is huge to get to feel, you're performing while you're doing this. And we want to try and help ourselves to be as musical and to give us as kind of intense a performance as possible while we're playing. So let me show you. I'll turn these both off. Oh, that was the other thing. So I've got also an L3 on. This is something that you probably could add more easily at the end. But again, I like to just whack something in very quickly across everything, just to put a quick rough beat in, maybe if I've got some drums going, and just hammer the piano for a bar or 2 bars, get it set roughly right, and then start and work through it, play through it as much as possible. But here, it's not doing a drastic amount. It's really just taming the absolute peaks just to make sure that nothing is going to distort. So let's have a listen to what is... Oh, and also that's actually a good idea. When you're using your analog stuff, it's a good idea to have something on after the analog stuff, just to make sure that you're not, you haven't got any kind of clips going through. Sometimes they just show up on the meter and you can see that you're clipping, but sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to hear. And if you have something like this that just does keep control of everything, it just gives you that extra little bit of security, especially if you're going for a very compressed sound like I am on this track. So let's have a quick listen. I'll go roughly into the middle of the track where lots of stuff is happening, and I'll turn the compression and EQ back on. So you can hear there what's going on, and it really is adding a ton of vibe to what I'm doing. So it's just so much easier to add parts, to play, to kind of really get into what you're doing, if you have that sensation that what's coming back at you is kind of sounds more like a finished mix than even if you're only 3 or 4 parts in. It just gives you that extra feeling and excitement about what you're doing. So let's have a quick listen from the top then. There we go. So you get the idea. Hope some of that was useful. Thank you very much for watching. See you on the next one. Bye-bye.